Hi, this is Greg Robinson from myphotographyshow.com, and right now I'm going to critique this image. This came from Michael. Thank you, Michael, for this image. This was an image of his grandson, which seems to be taken on the beach. I propose to critique this image in 3 different parts. Now, the first part is going to be on your settings, the second part is going to be about your sharpness, and the third part is going to be your composition. Okay? Let's start off right now with the first part, your settings. So, I see that you chose 100 ISO. That was a rather good choice given that you are in full sunlight at the beach. In order to have the less noise possible, great choice, perfect. Where I'm not quite agreeing with you is in terms of shutter speed and aperture. This mainly because of your focal length, which is why I added it here. Your focal length is 160 millimeters, so you are very, very zoomed in. Now, 1/60th of a second is not enough to freeze your subject in motion. This is where I'm going into both categories where I said I was going to talk about settings and then I'm going to talk about your sharpness. We're mixing both of them here. Bringing your aperture down to f16, by doing this you wanted to have a great depth of field. So I understand you wanted to have the background beach as sharp as your subject, which is a good idea. The problem is, when you're zooming, your depth of field is very, very narrow. That is just an optical rule, okay? So being at 160 millimeters, you would have great trouble in getting your subject and your background on the same level of sharpness unless they're both at infinity, which isn't the case here. So whatever happens, I would have suggested to open up your aperture at f5.6 at least in order to isolate your subject. By doing that, you would have gained 1, 2, 3 stops of aperture, because from f16 you go to f11, f8 and f5.6, so that's 3 stops more, which you can put back into your speed. So you got to 125th of a second, sorry, 1/250th of a second, and 1/500th of a second. So in these lighting conditions, what I'm saying is, instead of choosing f16 as an aperture and being stuck with 1/60th of a second, you can go down to f/5.6, grab those 3 extra stops of light and push your shutter speed up to 1/500th of a second, which would have frozen your image perfectly and you would have avoided all this blur, okay? Thirdly and lastly, your composition. Now, generally, as a general rule of thumb, when you're shooting a subject, especially in portrait, we tend to avoid having empty space on the opposite direction of the face, okay? If you have a look at my webcam, if I'm on this side of the webcam, okay, and I'm looking here, you feel that the screen is kind of cutting me off, okay? Whilst if I'm looking the same direction, but you frame it in such a way that there's space, then it gets interesting, okay? The image is much more interesting. Same here, or if I'm here, the image is completely different. So what I would have suggested in here, I'm not going to be able to do it perfectly, but I'll give it a try. Basically grab all that. This should have been done, just to be sure you understand what I'm saying, this should have been done whilst you were composing your image, before triggering, okay? This is not a Photoshop trick to correct your image. I would suggest doing a new image at this stage, okay? But if I create a new layer, just so that you understand what I mean, I move this one slightly to the right here, and then this one slightly to the left. There. That is the way your image should have been composed. Now obviously this line is just horrible and disgracious and all you want, but what I mean is, on this side of the image you have the extra space necessary to let your grandson breathe a bit. He's going towards something, just like me. If I put myself here, I'm going towards something, okay? That is very important in terms of portrait, unless you decide to frame right in the middle, in which case I would suggest going in a vertical shooting situation, okay? Best time to shoot a vertical is right after a horizontal. Remember that one. And there we go for that image. I'm sorry, really, Michael, I can't say much more. What bothers me most about this image is, as I said, composition and your lack of sharpness due to your closed aperture and slow shutter speed. Okay, so next time just bring up your shutter speed when you've got a very big focal length. When you're zooming in and you're using a high focal length, bring your shutter speed at least to the equivalent. So if you're using a focal length of 160 millimeters, use at least 1/160th of a second, okay? That's roughly the idea. So if you're using a 200 millimeters, you want a 1/200th of a second. If you're using a 50 millimeter, you can go down to 1/50th of a second. That's the general rule of thumb that enables you to keep your image nice and sharp, okay? So there we go. Thanks again for your image. For every other user out there who are listening, thank you for listening. I hope you learned something too. Now it's your turn to send your images on myphotographyshow.com. Do not hesitate. You can also subscribe on our Facebook page, on our YouTube channel, and on our Twitter, and you'll have lots of different information coming on there. Hope to see you soon, and hope to critique your own images.